The Invitation. Jack Carter was no stranger to adventure. As an independent explorer, he had traveled to the farthest corners of the galaxy, witnessing sights few humans ever dreamed of. But nothing in his life could have prepared him for the day he received a shimmering golden invitation. It was an ordinary morning aboard his ship, the Starbound Traveler. Jack had just finished his coffee when his AI companion, Nova, alerted him to an incoming transmission. "Jack," Nova's calm, robotic voice chimed. "You've received an encrypted message. The sender is unidentified." Jack leaned forward, intrigued. "Unidentified, huh? Let's see it." Nova projected the message on the ship's main display. It was written in a flowing alien script, glowing faintly with a soft, golden hue. Jack couldn't recognize the language, but something about it seemed ceremonial. "What do you make of this, Nova?" he asked. "I've translated it," Nova replied. "It's an invitation." Jack raised an eyebrow. "An invitation to what?" Nova paused for a moment before answering. "To a royal wedding. The location is on the planet Xeris 5, deep in uncharted space." Jack's jaw dropped. A royal wedding. Him. Why would a human be invited to such an event? He scratched his head, staring at the glowing text on the screen. This had to be some kind of mistake. "Are you sure this is for me?" he asked, half laughing. "The message is addressed specifically to you, Jack Carter," Nova confirmed. "It even includes your galactic ID." That made no sense. Jack had never been to Xeris 5. He didn't even know it existed until now. But the idea of attending an alien wedding was too tempting to ignore. After all, how often did someone get a chance to witness a royal celebration on another planet? "What's the worst that could happen?" Jack muttered to himself with a smirk. "All right, Nova. Set a course for Xeris 5. Let's see what this is all about." The journey to Xeris 5 was longer than Jack expected. As his ship approached the planet, he couldn't help but marvel at its beauty. Xeris 5 was a dazzling sphere of blue and silver, with shimmering rings that seemed to glow against the blackness of space. As he descended into the atmosphere, Jack's ship was scanned by automated drones. Nova informed him that the planet had some of the most advanced security systems in the galaxy. Jack wasn't surprised. After all, this was no ordinary wedding. The landing zone was unlike anything he'd ever seen. It wasn't a flat platform like most planets used. Instead, Jack's ship touched down on a massive glowing crystal that floated above a sparkling lake. Dozens of alien ships surrounded him, each one more bizarre than the last. As he stepped out of his ship, Jack was greeted by a tall, slender alien with shimmering blue skin and glowing golden eyes. The alien wore ornate robes covered in intricate patterns, and his demeanor was both regal and intimidating. "Welcome, honored guest," the alien said, bowing slightly. "I am Varric, the chief attendant of the royal house. We are pleased to have you join us." Jack nodded awkwardly, unsure how to respond. Thanks. It's an honor to be here." Varric studied him for a moment, his golden eyes narrowing. "You are the first human to attend a royal Xerigian wedding. Many here are curious about you." Jack smiled nervously. "I'm just as curious about all of this." Varric gestured for Jack to follow him. As they walked, Jack couldn't help but notice the grandeur around him. The path leading to the wedding venue was lined with towering crystals that hummed with energy. Alien guests of all shapes and sizes mingled, their strange voices creating a symphony of sounds. Some were covered in scales, others had fur, and a few seemed to be made entirely of light. The wedding venue itself was a massive cathedral-like structure made of translucent crystal. It glowed with a soft, pulsating light, as if it were alive. Jack felt a chill run down his spine. He was an outsider here, and the sheer scale of everything made him feel incredibly small. As he entered the cathedral, Jack noticed that many of the guests were staring at him. Whispers filled the air, though he couldn't understand what they were saying. He tried to focus on the beauty of the place, but the feeling of being watched was hard to shake. "Do not be alarmed," Varric said, sensing Jack's discomfort. "You are a rare guest. It is only natural that you attract attention." Jack forced a smile. "Right. No pressure." As they reached the central hall, Jack was directed to a seat near the front. From this vantage point, he could see the royal family seated on an elevated platform. They were adorned in shimmering garments that seemed to change colors with every movement. The bride and groom, seated at the center, radiated an aura of energy that was almost tangible. Just as Jack was beginning to relax, a shadow fell over him. He turned to see a tall, imposing alien with sharp features and piercing red eyes. "You shouldn't be here," the alien growled, his voice low and menacing. Jack blinked, taken aback. "Excuse me." The alien leaned closer, his gaze burning into Jack's. "You don't belong here, human. You were invited for a reason. But trust me, it's not what you think." Before Jack could respond, the alien disappeared into the crowd, leaving him with a sinking feeling in his chest. The wedding begins. Jack Carter wasn't prepared for the sound. It wasn't music, exactly. It was more like the universe itself was humming. The air vibrated with deep, resonant tones that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. The crystalline cathedral glowed brighter with each pulse, the light shifting through a kaleidoscope of colors that dazzled Jack's eyes. "Is this normal?" Jack whispered to Varric, who stood beside him like a silent guardian. "It is the song of unity," Varric replied, his voice reverent. "The heart of the ceremony. Only the most sacred unions are blessed with such a phenomenon." Jack nodded, pretending to understand, though the truth was he felt completely out of his depth. He glanced around at the other guests. Hundreds of alien beings were seated in perfectly arranged tiers, their glowing orbs, shifting scales, and strange appendages making him feel like the oddest creature in the room. He tugged at the collar of his formal suit, an outfit Nova had synthesized to match the Zerisian aesthetic. Suddenly, a deep gong-like sound echoed through the cathedral, silencing the crowd. The light in the room dimmed, leaving only the faint glow of the crystalline walls. Jack's heart raced as a spotlight of golden light illuminated the center stage. The bride and groom stepped forward, their forms radiating an otherworldly elegance. The bride, Serafina, was breathtaking. Her semi-translucent skin shimmered like liquid silver, and her flowing robes seemed to move on their own, as if they were alive. Her energy was palpable, and when her eyes briefly met Jack's, he felt a jolt of something, an emotion he couldn't quite place. The groom, Karen, stood beside her, his towering form exuding confidence and pride. His dark, obsidian-like skin seemed to drink in the light, while faint streaks of energy pulsed beneath its surface. Jack couldn't shake the feeling that he was witnessing something far more significant than a mere wedding. The ceremony began with a series of rituals that seemed both ancient and alien. First, the couple stood within a glowing ring of energy as elders chanted in a language Jack didn't recognize. Then they each placed their hands on a floating crystal orb that pulsed with a soft, rhythmic light. Every action felt deeply symbolic, as though each step held the weight of 1,000 years of tradition. But things took a strange turn when the gift-giving ceremony began. Jack had brought a simple token from Earth, a small piece of polished obsidian he'd picked up during his travels. It was nothing special, just a shiny black stone that reminded him of home. But when it was his turn to present his gift, something unexpected happened. As Jack approached the stage and held out the stone, the entire room seemed to pause. The crystal walls dimmed, the glowing light of the cathedral flickered, and a low hum filled the air. Serafina's eyes widened as her hand reached out instinctively to touch the obsidian. The moment her fingers brushed against it, the stone flared with a brilliant white light, sending a shockwave through the room. The energy field surrounding the couple shattered with a sound like breaking glass, and Serafina staggered backward, collapsing into Karen's arms. Gasps erupted from the crowd, and Jack froze, still clutching the glowing stone. His mind raced. What just happened? Why did the stone react like that? Guards rushed forward, their weapons drawn, but Serafina raised a trembling hand to stop them. "Wait," she said, her voice weak but commanding. "Do not harm him." Karen, however, looked furious. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, glaring at Jack. "What have you done?" Jack's voice caught in his throat. I don't know. It's just a rock. I didn't." Before he could finish, one of the elders stepped forward, their eyes glowing with an intense golden light. "This is no ordinary stone," they said, their voice echoing with authority. "It carries an energy that resonates with the bride's essence. Such a reaction can only mean one thing." The elder turned to face the crowd, their expression grave. "This human has disrupted the sacred balance of the ceremony. By the ancient laws of Xeris, he must take responsibility." Jack's stomach dropped. "Responsibility? What are you talking about?" The elder's glowing eyes locked onto his. "You, Jack Carter, have unknowingly altered the course of destiny. You must take the place of the original Groom." For a moment, the room was silent. Jack stared at the elder, trying to process their words. The Groom. Him. That was impossible. This had to be some kind of joke. Then the crowd erupted into chaos. The unexpected Groom. Jack Carter stood frozen, his mind racing. The words of the elder echoed in his ears. "You must take the place of the original Groom." The crystalline cathedral was in uproar. Aliens of all shapes and sizes argued in languages Jack couldn't understand. The air buzzed with tension as guests pointed, hissed, and murmured about the human interloper who had broken the ceremony. Jack raised his hands in protest. "Wait, there's been some mistake. I'm not a Groom. I'm just a guest." Varric, the chief attendant, placed a firm hand on Jack's shoulder, his face unusually grim. "This is no mistake, human. The stone you brought reacted with the bride's energy field. It has chosen you." "Chosen me? For what? I didn't sign up for this." Jack's voice cracked as he glanced nervously at Serafina. She stood beside Karen, her silver skin still shimmering faintly from the shock of the stone's reaction. Her expression, however, was not one of anger or fear. It was something else entirely. Curiosity. Resolve. Jack couldn't tell. Karen, on the other hand, was anything but calm. The towering alien Groom stepped forward, his obsidian-like skin crackling with faint sparks of energy. "This is absurd," he growled, his voice shaking the ground. "A human cannot take my place. This is a royal union, an alliance that has been planned for generations. This creature is unworthy." Jack felt a wave of heat rise in his chest. He may have been out of his depth, but he wasn't going to stand there and be insulted. "Hey, I didn't ask to be here, buddy. If I had a choice, I'd be back on my ship eating space rations, not standing here getting yelled at by a guy who looks like he ate a lightning bolt." The crowd gasped. Varric's grip on Jack's shoulder tightened, and even Serafina's lips twitched in what might have been amusement. "Silence," boomed the elder, their glowing eyes flashing with authority. The cathedral fell quiet, though the tension in the air was thick enough to cut. The elder turned to Karen. "The ancient laws are clear. When the balance of the ceremony is disrupted, the one who caused it must assume responsibility." "But why me?" Jack blurted out. "I didn't even know what that stone would do." The elder's gaze pierced him, unyielding. "The stone reacted because it recognized your energy as compatible with the bride's. This is no accident, human. The universe has chosen." Jack laughed nervously. "The universe? Seriously, that's a bit dramatic, don't you think?" Serafina stepped forward, her voice calm but commanding. "Enough," she said, silencing both Karen and the crowd. Her silver eyes locked onto Jack's, and for a moment, he felt as though she could see straight into his soul. "The elders are correct. The energy that binds us has spoken. You may not understand it now, Jack Carter, but your presence here is no coincidence." Jack swallowed hard. So, what? You're okay with this? With me? Serafina tilted her head, a faint smile playing on her lips. The universe rarely makes mistakes. And besides, she added, her tone light but firm, I doubt you would have come all this way just to watch. The room erupted again, but this time, the noise felt distant to Jack. His heart pounded as the reality of the situation began to sink in. He wasn't just a spectator anymore. He was the main event. Before he could think of a way to escape, Varric gestured toward the glowing circle in the center of the room. Step forward, Jack Carter. The ceremony must continue. Jack hesitated. What happens if I say no? The elder's eyes narrowed. To refuse is to dishonor the bride and the royal family. Such an act would not end well, for you or your kind. Jack sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. Great. No pressure. With shaky steps, he approached the glowing circle. Serafina joined him, her presence oddly calming despite the chaos around them. Karen stood off to the side, his fists clenched and his expression murderous, but he didn't dare interrupt again. As Jack stepped into the circle, a soft hum filled the air. The light grew brighter, enveloping him and Serafina in a golden glow. Jack felt a strange warmth wash over him, as if invisible threads were weaving around his body, connecting him to something far greater than himself. By the ancient rites of Xeris, the elder intoned, their voice echoing through the cathedral, we unite these two souls as one. Let their bond bring balance to our people. Jack glanced at Serafina, his pulse racing. So, does this mean we're married now? Serafina's smile widened slightly. Not yet, but you'll know when it happens. Before Jack could ask what she meant, the golden glow intensified, and a powerful surge of energy shot through him. His vision blurred, his thoughts scattered, and for a moment, he felt as though he were standing on the edge of the universe itself. Then everything went dark. The bride's secret. Jack Carter woke with a start, his head pounding as if he'd been hit by a solar flare. For a moment, he wasn't sure where he was. The last thing he remembered was the blinding golden light during the ceremony. And then, nothing. Finally awake, I see. The voice was calm, melodic, and laced with quiet amusement. Jack turned his head to find Serafina sitting gracefully on a floating cushion of light. Her shimmering silver skin glowed faintly in the dim chamber, and her gaze held a mixture of curiosity and something else. Something Jack couldn't quite name. What happened? Jack groaned, sitting up. He was lying on a soft, glowing surface that felt alive beneath him, pulsing gently with warmth. The bonding ceremony, Serafina said simply. It overwhelmed your human senses. I imagine it was like trying to drink from a waterfall with a spoon. Jack rubbed his temples. That's one way to put it. So, are we married now? Serafina tilted her head, her faint smile deepening. In the eyes of my people, yes. You are now my bonded partner, Jack Carter. But don't worry. I won't make you do the dishes. Jack blinked, unsure whether to laugh or panic. Great. So I've gone from wedding guest to alien groom in record time. What's next? Do I get a crown or something? Her expression softened, and she leaned closer, her voice dropping to a more serious tone. What happens next depends on you, Jack. Me? He asked, his tone skeptical. Look, I didn't sign up for this. I don't know the first thing about being someone's bonded partner, let alone saving a planet or whatever else you've got planned. Serafina's gaze grew sharper, her tone losing its lightness. Then it's time you understood why you're here. The chamber's walls shimmered, and suddenly, the room seemed to dissolve around them. Jack found himself standing in a vast, star-filled void. Serafina was beside him, her hand outstretched, as if guiding him through this strange illusion. What is this? Jack asked, his voice echoing in the emptiness. This is the truth, Serafina said. With a wave of her hand, the stars swirled and converged into an image of a distant galaxy. Planets spun in perfect harmony, their orbits glowing with energy. But then, one by one, the planets dimmed, their light extinguished by an ominous shadow creeping across the galaxy. "This is what's coming," Serafina explained. "An ancient enemy, a force that consumes and destroys everything in its path. My people call it the Voidbringers. They have already taken countless worlds, and now they are coming for Xeris." Jack watched in stunned silence as the shadow devoured planet after planet. "And what does this have to do with me?" Serafina turned to him, her silver eyes piercing. "Everything. The Voidbringers are drawn to power, to energy. The bonding ceremony wasn't just a tradition. It was a shield, a way to amplify the energy of two beings and create a force strong enough to protect our world." Jack frowned. "Okay, but I wasn't supposed to be part of that ceremony." "You had Karen. He's the one, woe." "Karen would never have been enough," Serafina interrupted, her voice firm. "He is strong, yes, but his energy does not resonate with mine the way yours does. The stone you brought proved that." Jack held up his hands, his frustration mounting. "I didn't even know that stone would do anything. It's just a rock from Earth." "It's not just a rock," Serafina said. "It's obsidian, a natural conductor of energy. The fact that it reacted to me when you held it means your energy is uniquely compatible with mine. You were meant to be here, Jack." Jack shook his head, overwhelmed. This is insane. I'm just a guy with a ship. I'm not some hero or savior. You've got the wrong human." Serafina stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. "I don't believe in coincidences, Jack. The universe brought you here for a reason. Whether you accept it or not, you are now part of this fight." The void dissolved, and they were back in the chamber. Jack sank onto the glowing surface, his head spinning. "So let me get this straight. If I don't play along, your planet gets wiped out by these Voidbringers." Serafina nodded solemnly. "And not just my planet. If the Voidbringers aren't stopped, they'll spread to other systems. Eventually, they'll reach Earth." Jack stared at her, the weight of her words settling on his shoulders. He had spent most of his life exploring the galaxy, never staying in one place for too long. But now, for the first time, he felt the pull of something bigger than himself, a responsibility he couldn't ignore. "All right," he said finally, his voice steady. "I'm in. But if we're going to do this, you'd better tell me everything I need to know." Serafina's lips curved into a small, genuine smile. "Good, because this is only the beginning." The threat unveiled. The sound of alarms shattered the calm of the palace, a piercing wail that seemed to vibrate through the very walls. Jack Carter bolted upright, nearly tumbling off the strange, floating bed he'd been assigned. The soft blue glow of the room turned crimson as emergency lights flickered to life. "What now?" he muttered, rubbing his eyes. Before he could gather his thoughts, the door slid open, and Serafina stormed in. Her normally calm demeanor was replaced by urgency, her silver skin shimmering with faint streaks of energy. "Get up, Jack," she commanded. "We don't have time." Jack blinked, still groggy. "Time for what? What's going on?" "The Voidbringers," she said, her tone sharp. "They've sent scouts. They're testing our defenses." That snapped Jack awake. "Scouts? You mean those shadow things you showed me?" "Yes," Serafina confirmed. "And if they're here, it means the full invasion isn't far behind." The corridors of the palace were alive with movement as Jack and Serafina made their way to the war chamber. Alien guards rushed past them, their weapons glowing with a strange, pulsating light. Jack couldn't help but feel out of place in his simple human attire. Everyone else looked like they belonged in a sci-fi epic, while he looked like a tourist who'd taken a wrong turn. The war chamber itself was vast and circular, with a holographic map of the galaxy dominating the center. Dozens of alien officials surrounded it, their expressions grim. As Jack and Serafina entered, the room fell silent. All eyes turned to him. "This is Jack Carter," Serafina announced, "my bonded partner and the key to our survival." Jack felt the weight of their stares, Some were curious, others skeptical, and a few downright hostile. One elder, a towering alien with a crystalline head, stepped forward. "This human," the elder began, their voice heavy with disdain, "is supposed to save us. He doesn't even know our ways, let alone our enemy." Jack bristled, but kept his tone even. "You're right. I don't know much about your ways. But if these Voidbringers are as bad as you say, you're going to need all the help you can get. So maybe skip the lecture and tell me what we're dealing with." The elder's eyes flashed, but Serafina intervened before they could respond. "Enough. Show us what the scouts have done." The holographic map shifted, zooming in on Xeris 5 and its surrounding moons. Several red markers blinked ominously near the planet's outer orbit. "They've already taken 3 of our outer satellites," a commander reported. "Our defense systems were unable to stop them. The Voidbringer's energy fields render most of our weapons useless." Jack studied the map, frowning. "What about the planet's surface? Do you have shields or ground-based defenses?" "We do," Serafina said, "but they won't hold against a full-scale attack. The Voidbringers consume energy. The more we throw at them, the stronger they become." Jack's mind raced as he processed the information. This wasn't just an invasion. It was a methodical dismantling of their defenses. The Voidbringers weren't just powerful. They were smart. As the room debated strategies, Jack's attention was drawn to a small, pulsating artifact on the edge of the map. It was similar to the stone he brought from Earth, but larger and encased in an intricate frame of glowing crystal. "What's that?" he asked, pointing to it. The room fell silent again. Serafina hesitated before answering. "That is the core of Xeris. It powers our planet's shields, our cities, and even our lives. Without it, Xeris would fall into chaos." Jack frowned. "And what happens if the Voidbringers get their hands on it?" "They would become unstoppable," the elder said grimly. "The core contains more energy than any other source in the galaxy. If they absorb it, they could consume entire star systems." Jack felt a cold knot form in his stomach. "So we can't let that happen." "It's not that simple," Serafina said. "The core's energy is tied to the planet itself. If we move it, Xeris will die." Jack paced, his mind racing for solutions. He was no military strategist, but he'd been in enough tight spots to know one thing. When you couldn't fight head-on, you had to think outside the box. "Okay," he said, stopping to face the room. "If we can't stop them with weapons, and we can't move the core, then we need to set a trap." The commander tilted their head, intrigued. "A trap?" Jack nodded. "The Voidbringers are drawn to energy, right? So let's give them something to chase. We set up decoys, fake energy sources, far from the planet. If we do it right, we can lure their forces away from Xeris and buy ourselves time to come up with a permanent solution." The room erupted into murmurs. Some of the officials looked skeptical, while others seemed to consider the idea. "It's risky," the elder said finally. "If they realize the decoys are false, they will return with greater force." Jack crossed his arms. "And if we do nothing, they'll take the core. And this planet is finished. Your choice." Serafina stepped forward, her voice clear and unwavering. "I believe in Jack's plan. We've already seen what his resourcefulness can do. We owe it to our people to try." The elder hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "Very well. We will prepare the decoys. But know this, human, if your plan fails, the fate of Xeris will rest on your shoulders." Jack met their gaze, determination hardening his features. "Fair enough. Just point me to where I can help." The final battle. The sky above Xeris 5 was on fire. Massive streaks of violet energy tore through the atmosphere as the Voidbringer fleet descended. Their shadowy ships looked more like living creatures than machines, writhing and pulsating with a dark energy that seemed to devour the light around them. Jack Carter stood on the palace's highest balcony, his fists clenched as he watched the enemy swarm closer. "They're here," Serafina said quietly, stepping beside him, Her silver eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the chaos in the skies. Jack didn't look at her. "So much for the decoys," he muttered, his voice tense. "They saw through the trick faster than we thought." Serafina's expression hardened. "They may have bypassed the decoys, but we still have the core's shield. It will hold, at least for a while." "Define a while," Jack said dryly, but his heart was pounding. The Voidbringers were relentless, and he knew their defenses wouldn't last long against such overwhelming power. Behind them, the war chamber buzzed with activity as commanders barked orders and tactical displays lit up the walls. The glowing holograms of the Voidbringer ships flickered with red warnings as the enemy pushed closer to the planet's surface. Jack turned to Serafina, his voice low. "We need a new plan. Fast." Minutes later, Jack found himself in the palace's underground command center, staring at a detailed map of Xeris. The core was displayed at the center, its glowing energy field represented by a pulsating golden light. Around it, smaller markers indicated ground defenses, shield generators, and evacuation zones. "They're targeting the shield generators first," a commander reported. "Once those are down, they'll focus on the core." Jack rubbed his chin, his mind racing. "What happens if we reinforce the generators? Can we buy more time?" Serafina shook her head. "We've already diverted every available unit to protect them. If we weaken our forces elsewhere, the Voidbringers will find another way in." Jack slammed his hand on the table in frustration. There has to be something we're missing. Some way to turn their strength against them. The elder, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke. "The Voidbringers' power lies in their hunger for energy, but that hunger can also be their weakness." Jack looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" The elder's glowing eyes locked onto his. "If we overload them, feed them more energy than they can consume, it could destabilize their forces." Jack frowned. "You're saying we should bait them with the core? That's insane. If they reach it, it's game over." "Not if we control the release," Serafina interjected. Her gaze was sharp, calculating. "The core is connected to Xeris itself. We could use its energy to create a controlled surge, enough to overwhelm the Voidbringers without destroying the planet." Jack stared at her. "That's a huge gamble. What if the surge backfires? What if it takes out the planet anyway?" "It won't," Serafina said firmly. "The core responds to intent. If we're in sync, it will follow our will." Jack's heart sank. "And by we you mean you and me," she said, meeting his gaze. "Our bond is what makes this possible. Without it, the core won't respond." Jack let out a long breath. "So, no pressure, then." The plan was set in motion quickly. As the Voidbringers launched their first ground assault, Jack and Serafina made their way to the core's chamber. The air grew warmer as they descended, the walls shimmering with golden light that pulsed in time with their footsteps. The core itself was breathtaking, a massive glowing sphere of pure energy, suspended in midair by intricate crystalline pillars. It hummed softly, radiating a warmth that seemed to fill Jack with both awe and dread. Serafina placed a hand on the nearest pillar, her silver skin glowing faintly as she connected with the core's energy. "This will work," she said, more to herself than to Jack. "It has to," Jack replied, his voice steadier than he felt. The Voidbringers' ships had begun their descent, their shadowy forms visible through the chamber's translucent ceiling. Time was running out. Jack stepped forward, placing his hand on the pillar beside Serafina's. The moment he did, a surge of energy shot through him, filling his body with a strange, electric warmth. He gasped, his vision blurring as he felt his consciousness expand, merging with Serafina's and the core itself. "Focus," Serafina said, her voice echoing in his mind. "We have to direct the energy together." Jack nodded, his thoughts aligning with hers. He could feel the core's power like a storm beneath the surface, waiting to be unleashed. Together, they guided the energy upward, toward the Voidbringers. Outside, the skies erupted with light. The core's energy shot through the atmosphere, enveloping the invading fleet in a blinding surge. The Voidbringer's ships began to collapse, their forms unraveling as the energy overloaded their systems. The chamber shook violently, and Jack could feel the strain of the core's power. "It's too much," he shouted. "We're pushing it too far." "Just a little longer," Serafina urged, her voice steady. "We're almost there." With one final surge, the core's energy exploded outward, obliterating the last of the Voidbringer ships. The light faded, leaving the skies above Xeris clear once more. Jack staggered back, his hand slipping from the pillar. He was exhausted, his body trembling from the effort. Serafina caught him before he fell, her expression softening as she smiled. "You did it," she said. "We did it." Jack let out a shaky laugh. "Yeah, but I'm pretty sure I'm going to feel that for a week." Serafina chuckled, her silver eyes glowing with warmth. "Rest now, Jack. The battle is over, but the war is far from won. A new beginning." The battlefield was quiet now, the echoes of destruction fading into an eerie calm. The sky above Xeris 5, once ablaze with the chaos of battle, was now a serene gradient of silver and gold. The remnants of the Voidbringer fleet drifted like broken shadows, their once mighty forms reduced to inert fragments. Jack Carter stood at the edge of the palace balcony, his gaze fixed on the horizon. His hands rested on the smooth crystalline railing, the warmth of the material a sharp contrast to the cold weight in his chest. Below him, the city of Xeris stirred with life as survivors emerged from shelters, cautiously stepping into a world they weren't sure would still exist. "You did it," a soft voice said from behind him. Jack turned to see Serafina approaching, her silver skin glimmering faintly in the soft light. She moved with a calm grace, but her eyes betrayed the wariness they both shared. She joined him at the railing, standing close enough that their arms nearly touched. "We did it," Jack corrected. His voice was steady, but his exhaustion seeped into every word. "But at what cost?" Serafina's gaze shifted to the city below. "There is always a cost in war. But thanks to you, my people have a chance to rebuild. To live." Jack exhaled slowly, his mind replaying the events of the battle. The surge of the core's energy, the blinding light, the Voidbringer's ships disintegrating into nothingness. It was all a blur. He felt like a man who had wrestled with a storm and barely lived to tell the tale. "I'm just a guy with a ship," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. "How did I end up here, leading an entire planet into battle?" Serafina smiled faintly. "The universe has a way of choosing the most unexpected heroes. You may not have sought this path, Jack, but you walked it all the same." The Elder's arrival broke the moment. Their crystalline forms shimmered as they approached, their steps soundless against the polished floor. "The council has convened," the Elder announced. "They await your presence, bonded ones." Jack's stomach tightened. "Bonded ones," he muttered under his breath. "Still getting used to that." Serafina touched his arm lightly, her expression encouraging. "You'll get used to it. They respect you now, Jack. More than you know." Jack glanced at her, then back at the Elder. "All right, let's get this over with." The council chamber was a stark contrast to the chaos Jack had witnessed earlier. It was a circular room bathed in soft golden light, with crystalline pillars reaching up to a domed ceiling that shimmered like a starry sky. The elders sat in a semicircle, their glowing eyes fixed on Jack and Serafina as they entered. "Jack Carter," one of them said, their voice resonating like a chime. "You have done what many thought impossible. You have saved Xeris from the Voidbringers." Jack shifted uncomfortably. "I didn't do it alone." "Serafina, your people." "Do not downplay your role," another elder interrupted, their tone firm but not unkind. "You are no longer an outsider. You are one of us now." The words hit Jack like a tidal wave. He had spent most of his life on the fringes, exploring the galaxy with no real ties to anyone or anything. And now, here he was, bonded to an alien princess, hailed as a hero. and entrusted with the future of an entire planet. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice quieter than he intended. The elder closest to him leaned forward. "Now, we rebuild. But the threat of the Voidbringers is far from over. They will return, stronger than before. We must prepare." Jack nodded slowly, the weight of their words settling on his shoulders. He looked at Seraphina, who met his gaze with calm determination. "You're not alone in this," she said, her voice steady. "We'll face whatever comes, together." Later that night, Jack found himself once again on the palace balcony, staring up at the twin moons of Xeris. He was lost in thought when Seraphina joined him, a soft breeze carrying the faint scent of the planet's crystalline flowers. "You seem far away," she said. Jack chuckled softly. "Just thinking. About everything. About what's next." Seraphina stepped closer, her presence grounding him. "You don't have to have all the answers right now, Jack. The path ahead will reveal itself in time." He looked at her, a small smile tugging at his lips. "You're pretty good at this whole wise princess thing." She laughed lightly, her silver eyes sparkling. "And you're pretty good at this whole reluctant hero thing." For the first time in days, Jack felt a sense of peace. The battle was over, but the journey was just beginning. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't walking it alone. As the moons cast their gentle light over the city, Jack made a silent promise to himself. He would protect this world, these people, and the bond he shared with Seraphina, no matter what the future held.